Hello, AP Psychology. Welcome back after your long weekend. I hope everyone had a restful and relaxing 4 days off and that you got some time to take some time for yourselves. So today we're going to continue with the second half of our history and approaches lecture. It's just like the one on Thursday. And we are also going to have a reading assignment due tomorrow with questions just like we had last time. And don't forget, I do check those for completeness, but we go over the correct answers as a class in live instruction. So if you get hung up on anything, don't fret about it. That's why we're here. So let's get into today's lecture on the rest of intro, history, and approaches. So we left off talking about behaviorism, which is slightly different but related to the behavioral approach. Behaviorism is the accepted way of psychological inquiry after functionalism and structuralism. So then after functionalism and structuralism comes this school of thought called behaviorism. And that was developed by a psychologist named John B. Watson, who one of you did have for your famous psychologist mini project. And this was all during an era in which the big push in the sciences was to only study that which we can observe, that which is objective, that everyone could see what was happening. Behaviorist psychologists rejected the idea that we could study what was happening in somebody's mind because it's just a black box that can't be opened or understood. And their way of thinking was that since we'll never be able to fully understand it, trying to analyze that is just a lot of guesswork and therefore useless. So John B. Watson and the behaviorists only wanted to study observable behavior. So stimuli from the environment and the organism's response to those stimuli. So behaviorism is an example of that is when a teacher rewards a class for doing their homework or getting good grades on an exam by giving them some kind of reward. And or on the opposite end, if a teacher takes away something like, now you're not going to have recess time back when you were in elementary school because the class was out of pocket. Do you guys still say that? I don't even know. I'm showing my age. So now comes our friend Sigmund Freud. And fun fact about German number 2 is S's are pronounced like Z's in German. So Sigmund Freud, but I'm not quizzing you on your German pronunciation in this class. So Freud was the mind behind the approach to psychology called psychoanalysis. You may also see this referred to as Freudian psychology. And yes, if you've ever heard the term Freudian slip, comes from this. So a Freudian slip deals with when you accidentally say something that you didn't mean to say, like if you've ever called a teacher mom, it's because in your subconscious, or your unconscious, those connections are made and it slips out. So Freud is all about what influences the unconscious mind has on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So mental disorders, according to Freud and psychoanalysis, mental disorders are the result of conflicts in the unconscious mind that could be from experiences in our childhood that we have repressed, that we may not even have a memory of. Dream interpretation also comes out of psychoanalysis. So there's a typo on this slide. It should say 8 main perspectives. This is why I teach social studies and not math. So there are 8 main perspectives, as we discussed last week, to modern psychology, and those are neuroscience, also sometimes called biological, developmental, cognitive, psychodynamic, humanistic, behavioral, sociocultural, and evolutionary. So we're going to go through all those right now, and this is going to be more or less a review. And hopefully by the end of this Edpuzzle, you'll have a pretty clear idea on each one. So the first is the neuroscience or the biological view, and that looks at how our physical makeup and brain chemistry impacts our personality, preferences, behavior patterns, and abilities. So it's all determined by the brain structure itself and neurotransmitters, or the chemicals in the brain that send messages and are in charge of your mood and all kinds of things that we're going to get into in our biology and behavior unit, which is next. The developmental view. This is all about the idea that there are predictable stages of development in the human lifespan. And also it deals with the question of nature versus nurture. So how much of our behavior and cognitive processes are influenced by our environment versus our heredity. And you see here, when we get into our human development unit, which will be, I think it's our 5th unit, but I could be wrong. We're going to talk about some developmental psychologists, including Piaget, not Piaget. So these psychologists have really crazy names. So several psychologists have different theories on what stages occur when, but they all agree that there are predictable stages of lifespan development and certain milestones occur in each of these stages. The cognitive view, and this is the opposite of the behaviorists. Remember, the behaviorists think that we should not even consider studying what's happening in someone's mind because it's not reliable, but cognitivists think differently about that. And according to them, our actions are a direct result of the way that we uniquely process information from our environment. When you think of the cognitive view, think of that people think of the brain like a information processing system. And our behavior is the result of our interpretation of our experience. And when we talk about what cognition is, cognition refers to thoughts, expectations, perceptions, memories, and states of consciousness. States of consciousness meaning like being asleep versus awake, also being impaired by drugs or other chemicals. And we're going to talk about that more as well, along with our psychological disorders unit. The psychodynamic view, yes, this comes from Freud. So sometimes you'll see, well, psychoanalysis is the process of doing of the psychodynamic view in action, but really for our purposes, the two are more or less interchangeable. So the psychodynamic view is the idea that the mind is a reservoir of energy, and it comes from the word psyche and dynamics. So psyche meaning mind, dynamics meaning energy. And there are these levels of consciousness that we have that we're only aware of the tiniest bit, that tip of the iceberg there that you see. And then there's so much more happening beneath the surface that influences our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So psychodynamic theory sees our behavior as rising from unconscious needs, conflicts, repressed memories, and childhood experiences. The humanistic view, remember I call this one the hippy dippy view, and this one gets the most pushback from modern psychologists, even though it is becoming more widely accepted because it is the least scientific, that is true. The humanistic view rejects a lot of notions of what should be and focuses more on the person as a whole and the uniqueness of that person. It emphasizes human ability, growth, potential, and free will. And it is similar to the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic perspective because it emphasizes our mental thoughts and process as the root of what we do, but is more focused on the positive side of human behavior and seeks to help people become the best versions of themselves. So the hippy-dippy view of psychology. The behavioral view. So we mentioned this before with behaviorism. Some psychologists today, usually behavioral view is used in tandem with other views. It's not really, very, very, very few, if any, psychologists today ascribe totally to only the behavioral view. And this is all about the source of our actions being what is happening in our environment. We're just responding to what is out here rather than what's in here. And we respond to certain stimuli based on our history of dealing with rewards and punishments associated with it. Another important behaviorist for you to know is B.F. Skinner. He's perhaps the most famous behaviorist, and he was also included in the famous Psychologist Project that one of you had. He developed the theory of operant conditioning, which I'm going to operant condition all of you in a couple months. And operant conditioning is the idea that behavior is determined by consequences. And the consequences are either reinforcements or punishments. And just a note, we do not say that consequences are positive or negative, meaning like good or bad. We call things that are good reinforcements and things that are bad punishments. We'll get into positive versus negative in that positive versus negative reinforcement, positive versus negative punishment when we get to that unit. The sociocultural view emphasizes the importance of social interaction, social learning, and a cultural perspective. It borrows a lot from sociology, and the biggest idea of that is human behavior has to be analyzed within its social context. So without understanding a social context, we really can't understand why somebody thinks, acts, and feels the way that they do. And then finally, the evolutionary perspective. And this is all about looking at behaviors of individuals through the lens of natural selection, or the idea that certain traits will be passed down from generation to generation to generation based on what has served the species the best. According to the evolutionary perspective, behavior is adaptive, meaning it can change, and hereditary, you get it from your genetics, and influenced by culture. So this was on your homework questions last week, and some of you wanted some more clarification on this. So the idea of levels of analysis is that we can't just use one approach to psychology to explain thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's best to use multiple, because looking at an issue from multiple perspectives gives us a more nuanced understanding of how and why somebody acts, thinks, and feels the way that they do. So for instance, if we were analyzing the psychology of, you know, a violent event like a shooting, some of the questions that we might ask ourselves are, does the shooter have a brain disorder, the neuroscience or biological perspective? Does the shooter have genetic tendencies towards violence? That could be the evolutionary perspective. Have they been rewarded for violent behavior? The behaviorist perspective. And are we a gun-promoting society that supports violence? The sociocultural perspective. So that's it for today, Psych, in terms of our lecture. So I would like you now to move on to the next chapter in Myers and answer the questions. Of course, if you have any questions, concerns, what have you, please feel free to reach out. My office hours are the usual time, 3 to 4. And also, if you would like to reach out to me on Remind or through email and set up a Google Meet during our normal class time from 2 to 3, that is also something that you can do and that I'm happy to do for you. So I'll see you all on Google Meet tomorrow at 2:04. Have a wonderful Tuesday, Psych.